In the year 1177 BC, the world ended. Not one city, every city. Not one kingdom, every kingdom. 8 of the most powerful civilizations on Earth collapsed almost simultaneously, and humanity forgot how to read, how to build, how to make bronze. For 300 years, nothing was written down. We are still trying to figure out what happened. To understand what was destroyed, you have to first understand what existed. Around 1250 BC, the Eastern Mediterranean was the most interconnected place on Earth. 8 powers shared a single, intricate trade web. In Egypt, the pharaoh Ramesses II reigned from a palace of carved stone and gold. In Anatolia, the Hittite Empire commanded an army of bronze chariots that could shake the plains. In Greece, the Mycenaeans built citadels with walls so massive that later Greeks would believe giants had stacked them. On Cyprus, foundries burned day and night, casting copper into ox-hide ingots, the shape of a stretched cowskin, because that's how they were carried. In Mesopotamia, the Babylonians and Assyrians kept libraries of clay tablets. In the harbor city of Ugarit, on the Syrian coast, ships from every coast of the Mediterranean met to trade. And here is the single most important fact in this story: to make bronze, you need copper and tin. Copper came from Cyprus. Tin came from Afghanistan, 3,000 miles away. Every weapon, every plow, every cauldron, every coin of value in this entire world depended on a supply chain that stretched almost the full width of the known continent. Cut that chain, and the world breaks. Someone was about to cut it. In 1274 BC, the largest chariot battle in human history was fought at Kadesh, in modern Syria. Egyptians against Hittites. 5,000 chariots in a single afternoon. They fought to a draw. And then, and this is the part that should astonish you, they signed a peace treaty. A copy of it hangs in the United Nations building in New York today. The oldest surviving peace treaty between 2 superpowers in human history. Think about that. 3,000 years ago, 2 enemies who had just killed thousands of each other's soldiers sat down and drew up borders. They agreed to extradite refugees. They agreed to come to each other's aid if a third power attacked. These were not primitive people stumbling toward civilization. They had already arrived. This was a literate world. Kings wrote to each other in a shared diplomatic language, Akkadian, the Latin of the Bronze Age. We have hundreds of their letters, preserved in baked clay. The collection from El Amarna in Egypt alone holds over 300 letters between pharaohs and the rulers of Babylon, Mitanni, the Hittites, and Cyprus. They complained about late shipments of gold. They arranged royal marriages between their children. They sent doctors to each other's courts when a queen fell ill. One Babylonian king wrote to a pharaoh asking, essentially, why his last letter had been so rude, and signed it with the warmth of a brother-in-law owed an apology. A merchant in Ugarit could insure cargo bound for Crete. A scribe in Babylon could write to a colleague in Egypt and expect a reply within a season. There were standard weights for measuring tin, standard volumes for measuring olive oil, standard exchange rates for converting one kingdom's silver into another's. This was globalization. 3,000 years before we invented the word. And every one of these civilizations was built on the same fragile model, a palace economy. The king didn't just rule. The king was the economy. The palace stored the grain, paid the soldiers, commissioned the bronze, dictated what every weaver and smith and shepherd produced. It worked beautifully. As long as the trade routes held. As long as the harvests came in. As long as nothing went wrong all at once. In 1200 BC, the world looked permanent. It had less than 50 years left. They came from the sea, and they had no country. Egyptian scribes called them the Sea Peoples, a loose coalition of warriors and refugees and pirates, sailing in ships with prows shaped like birds, wearing feathered headdresses, fighting for survival or plunder or a place to land. We still don't know exactly who they were. Some were probably Mycenaean Greeks fleeing a homeland that was already burning. Some came from Sicily. Some from Anatolia. Some from places we cannot name. Between 1200 and 1180 BC, the Mycenaean palaces of Greece burned. Pylos, Thebes, Tiryns, Mycenae itself. The citadel of Agamemnon, gone. And not just burned. Abandoned. The Greeks forgot how to write. The Linear B script vanished. It would not return for 400 years, and when it did, it would be a different language. The age of Homer's heroes ended in fire and silence. Further east, the Hittite Empire, 500 years of dominance, simply ceased to exist. Hattusa, the capital, was abandoned around 1190 BC. The royal family disappears from the historical record. No conquering army claims the city. No successor empire rises in its place. They are just gone. In the Syrian port of Ugarit, a scribe was finishing a letter to the king of Cyprus. The text is short, frantic, real. It reads, "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came here, my cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country, the country is abandoned to itself." He never sent it. The fire that destroyed Ugarit baked the unsent tablet hard. We can read it today because the city died around it. Only Egypt survived. In 1177 BC, the pharaoh Ramesses III defeated a massive Sea People's invasion at the Battle of the Delta. He had it carved on the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, in triumphant relief. But Egypt was no longer the same country. The empire bled out slowly across the next century. The trade routes did not come back. The bronze did not come back. For 2 centuries, historians blamed the Sea Peoples. But the Sea Peoples are not enough. Refugees fleeing in ships do not, by themselves, end 8 civilizations. The real answer began to emerge in 2013, when a team of paleoclimatologists led by David Kanuski drilled core samples from lake beds in Cyprus and Syria. They analyzed the pollen, preserved layer by layer, year by year. What they found was a 300-year megadrought. Beginning around 1250 BC, the eastern Mediterranean grew steadily drier. Harvests failed. Rivers shrank. Famine became normal. This is the first cause. Climate change. Slow, grinding, invisible to the people living through it. By the time you notice the famine has been getting worse for a generation, it is already too late. The second cause is geology. Between roughly 1225 and 1175 BC, an unusual cluster of earthquakes struck the region, what some seismologists now call an earthquake storm. Mycenaean palaces show seismic damage at exactly the right strata. The third cause is internal. When the palace economy fails, when grain runs out and bronze stops arriving, the people stop believing in the king. Mycenaean tablets from the final months at Pylos show frantic preparations for an attack. Rowers being mustered. Bronze being recycled from religious offerings. The state, eating itself. And the fourth cause is the Sea Peoples themselves, both the symptom and the accelerant. They were almost certainly refugees from the first 3 disasters. Climate collapse and earthquake destruction had created the migration. The migration then destabilized everywhere it landed. 4 shocks. None of them, alone, would have ended a world. All 4 together, in 50 years, and the most interconnected civilization in history simply broke. The dark age that followed was not poetic. It was hungry. Population fell across the eastern Mediterranean by an estimated 40 to 60%. Cities shrank to villages. Stone buildings became wood. International trade collapsed almost to zero. Writing disappeared from the Greek world for 400 years. But in that silence, something quiet was happening. Bronze required tin from 3,000 miles away. Iron did not. Iron ore is everywhere. It is harder to work, you need higher temperatures, better techniques, but once you learn the trick, you are no longer dependent on a fragile global supply chain. When literacy returned to Greece around 800 BC, it was not in the syllabic linear B of the palaces. It was in a new alphabet, borrowed from the Phoenicians, simpler, democratic, no longer the property of priests and royal scribes. Out of the ruin came something the Bronze Age had never known. A world without palaces. A world where iron made every farmer dangerous. A world where writing belonged to merchants and poets, not kings. A few centuries later, men in that recovered world would invent philosophy, democracy, and tragedy. The collapse cleared the ground. The Bronze Age civilizations thought they were permanent. They had been thriving for 500 years. Their kings wrote to each other. Their ships sailed every coast. Their bronze armies were the most powerful weapons on the planet. Their trade web carried tin from one end of the continent to the other. And then the climate shifted, the earth shook, the supply chains broke, the refugees arrived, and in 50 years, all of it was gone. We have a globalized, just-in-time supply chain. We have climate stress. We have mass migration. We have palace economies that look invincible. In the year 1177 BC, the world ended. History does not repeat itself. But sometimes, it rhymes loud enough to wake us up. If this changed how you see civilization, subscribe, we reconstruct a lost world every week.